Hey, this is Hunter with Lone Star Woodworking, and in this video, I lug around a 200-pound slab from a 300-year-old tree. I fail pretty miserably at making some custom table legs. I succeed pretty fantastically at building some custom table legs. And in the end, I build a pretty damn cool desk. So this build started off with me just kind of perusing through Marketplace. No real goal, I was just seeing what was out there. And I came across this listing for some really big live oak slabs. Now, if you've never heard of live oak or if you don't know what it is a subspecies of white oak. And if you want to go down the subspecies rabbit hole of red and white oak, you can be there for a really long time. There's about 600 different species of oak worldwide, and the ones I come into contact with most often down here in Houston, Texas, are obviously red and white oak, but then their subspecies being post oak, pin oak, water oak, sometimes this live oak. Blackjack oak doesn't seem to be as common as the ones I just listed, but seems to be more common down here than anywhere else. So if there is a species of oak out there that only seems to be known by people in your region, or even better, just by you, go ahead and drop those down in the comments, because I am genuinely curious how many different species of oak can be named. Now, the seller was listing these for $900, and yeah, that's a good chunk of change, but these slabs were 12 feet long, 4 to 5 feet wide, 3 inches thick, dry, and ready to start being worked with. So $900 is a pretty good deal. That being said, I don't have $900 at any given point in time to just go drop at the first good Facebook Marketplace deal that I come across. But I reached out to the seller anyway, because just in case a client reached out and had a specific idea that I would be able to use these slabs for, I wanted to be able to pitch them. So I reached out to the seller. He and I had a good back and forth. It eventually came up that I do YouTube and that I build this kind of furniture. And he came back with a proposition, being that he would give me a slab totally free. Pretty good deal. The stipulation being whatever I build from it and however much it sells for, if it ever sells, he gets to keep 50% of the profits. Nope, you didn't hear that incorrectly. 50% of the profits. No, he was not going to be involved with any of the building. He was not going to help out with any of the materials. And really the only thing that he was going to do as far as his part in all of this was supply the slab. Now, from a business standpoint, yeah, I'm absolutely getting the shit end of that stick. But what I need y'all to understand is that most of my projects go this way. I take a gamble on what I'm doing, and maybe it sells, maybe it doesn't. I don't really run my quote-unquote business like a corporation. That's just not the level that I'm at. I own the name Lone Star simply because of a curiosity, call it. Maybe one day I'll get to that commercial level and I'll be able to really put Lone Star Woodworking on a nice big sign on a storefront. But for right now, this is just a hobby that makes me some money occasionally. I really do this for fun. And so to lose out on 50% of whatever this sells for really didn't bother me that much, especially since this is a 300-year-old slab. And just that fact alone and thinking about the stories this thing could tell, that's what really draws me into this project. I like money, just like anybody else, but it definitely doesn't dictate how I do my woodworking. All right, so clearly this whole endeavor has not gone well so far. You can see it leaked all under there, even though I put the caulking around the cracks. I guess I didn't get hardly any of them, really. You can see how much is just all over the surface of the slab, and I mean, it did fill up a little bit. I mean, is there even any in there? I mean, yeah, there's some in there. So I at least have a base of some sort. These filled up pretty well. Gotta go back, probably put a little bit more in those. But yeah, this side it's obviously the worst one. I mean, leaked out onto my bench here. So that's probably epoxy welded to the freaking bench. I mean, you know, all in all, this really, it looks bad. It's not that bad. It's really more annoying than anything, but it's correctable. But you can see here, I'm kind of having the same issues here that I had with that silver poplar root ball table, where these cracks on the side of the slab are somehow connected to some of these cracks and holes on the top. So there was really no way for me to plan for any of this unless I just caulked everything up. But even then, that's gonna make an insane amount of work for me later. So I took a risk, it bit me in the butt, and that's just kind of where we're at right now. So I'm actually gonna take this thing off of the form. I'm gonna see what we're dealing with on the bottom, and I'm gonna see how I can proceed with the top. So I had a pretty healthy dose of optimism after going into this a little bit. And the reason was because sometimes these big mess ups aren't nearly as bad as they seem. And I was really hoping that this was going to be the case. But you'll see here in just a second, I really should have kept my healthy dose of pessimism. Yeah, I messed up pretty bad here. This is a really, really thick layer of epoxy on just the bottom. That wasn't supposed to happen. That was not the goal with anything that I did over the last few days. So here's the problem now, right? The entire bottom of this, hold on, let me refocus. Come on, there we go. The entire bottom of this is now coated in epoxy, which means that it's sealed, which means that it's not absorbing any more moisture. So I'm gonna flip this thing over. I'm going to put a coat of shellac on the top just so I don't have to worry about it warping or anything like that. This is a pretty solid piece, but with only half the moisture being absorbed on one side, or I guess the entirety of the moisture being absorbed on one side, I would still venture to say that this thing would warp. So we're gonna flip it, shellac it, fill the rest of the voids, and hopefully move on to something else. So if you're new, it may not make a ton of sense to you why wood absorbing moisture on one side could potentially cause warping. And the shortest but most thorough answer that I could possibly think of was once the wood has been dried, it has to absorb and expel moisture at an even rate on both sides in order to stay flat. It's not like a sponge where if you put a sponge into a puddle of water, it's going to absorb that water, distribute the water evenly to where by the end of it, you have this evenly saturated sponge. With wood, that moisture is only going to penetrate a partial depth down into the wood. It's not going to go all the way through and equalize throughout the slab. So that's what causes warping if only one side is absorbing moisture at a different rate than the other. I hope that was clear. I hope that wasn't too confusing. If it was confusing and you need me to kind of simplify it, or if you just want clarification on something that I've said, please don't hesitate to go ahead and drop that comment. I'm really good about responding to every single one of them. If you're just trying to say, hey, I'll at least give you a like, let you know I saw it, let you know I appreciate it. So yeah, if you got any questions, go ahead and drop that comment. Now, after everything has been curing for about a week and a half, it was all nice and hard. It was time to take this slab along with two other projects that I'm working on over to Algoa Millworks for him to flatten it on his big Lucas mill. Now, I used to do my own flattening. In fact, most of my videos leading up to I think the last 3 or 4 have been me setting up a stone coat countertops jig and flattening everything myself. I stopped doing that for a couple reasons. One, I was making a huge mess in my wife's garden. 2, it was a whole lot more worth my time and produced a better product to have Corey do it with his nice, big, finely tuned machine. I would highly recommend exploring that option if it's available to you, but if you have no other option, I will provide a link to the Stone Coat Countertops jig that I used to use because I think it is money really well invested. For the first round of touch-ups, I'm going over the really big gaps and voids using some tabletop epoxy and activated charcoal as my color to prevent staining. For the second round of corrections, I'm using the Superior polyester resin. And this was recommended to me by a buddy of mine on social media, and he noticed that I was using Fixo and recommended this as a cheaper alternative by volume, because Fixo per bottle is like 15 bucks. This was 40 bucks for the entire can, but I do have to use a lot less of it, and it does seem like it's going to last me a lot longer. The cool thing about this is it sets up really fast, and by really fast, I was still smearing it on and it had hardened up. That was really crazy to me, and as I said in my last video, I am an incredibly impatient person. So to have this tool now in my arsenal is phenomenal, because now I don't have to wait an entire day or even just a couple hours for something to cure. I do have a couple of small gripes with it though. The first being that it doesn't cure very hard, so I would really highly recommend keeping your corrections with it to small and medium gaps, just so there's no easy way to feel the different consistencies between the epoxy, the wood, and the Superior resin. The last little gripe is that it really does gunk up your sandpaper a lot. You gotta be okay with going through a sheet of sandpaper every couple of minutes, because it is going to gunk it up, and that little eraser tool does not work in getting it off. Other than that though, this is a great product and I absolutely will continue to use this. Now the third round of touch-ups is just the typical CA glue and activator trick. There were a lot of little hairline cracks on the top here that I really wanted to fix, because this is going to be a desk, which means that it's going to be a writing surface. And I don't want someone to be writing something on a piece of paper, go over one of those little hairline cracks and jam either their pen or pencil into the top of the slab and essentially ruin their desk, especially for how much I'm charging for it. After that, it was time to get everything outside as I awkwardly crab walk or waddle, whatever word you want to use to describe that. Either way, this thing is damn heavy. And here I'm just squaring everything up, getting things down to its final dimensions. It did end up a little bit shorter than I wanted it, because I messed up one of my cuts there, because my track saw was currently being used by a friend. I know, always a bad idea to loan out your tools, but I know where he lives. So, got everything squared up with a straight edge and a circular saw. Now moving on to my stabilizing hardware, and I've gone over this a few times, and I mean, there's really not a whole lot for me to say on it. I do plan on making a video on how I actually do this, because there are not a huge amount of differences between this and the typical C-channel method that you'll see used by a lot of other creators that do these live edge slab projects. But I do feel like there are enough to warrant a video clarifying some of the steps. So that video is in the works, and I'm not knocking you if you use the C channels. I'm just lazy and was looking for a much quicker way to do things without sacrificing the strength of the actual stability. And this is what I came up with, and I'll say that it has really impressed me so far. I've made a couple of tables like this, and every single one of them have stayed nice and flat. I haven't noticed much of a difference between the performance of these and the C channels that I used to use. Now, because these are just raw metal cutoffs that I got from just the Home Depot metal section, I do recommend that you get a really good spray paint and finish them in black, because I just think that looks good with everything. Just gives it a more finished look, and it's going to protect it from rusting later on down the road. Now for the bottom, I'm just going to stick with the Superior resin, because there were no giant gaps that really warranted any of the tabletop resin. And I wasn't too worried about the small imperfections, because this is the bottom. It's not going to be a writing surface on this side, so I didn't really feel the need to give it the same level of attention to detail that I gave the top. Now, after sanding all of this off, I'm going to show you something called raking light. And if you don't know what raking light is, it is a light source that shines down on and across your workpiece that allows you to see inconsistencies in your sanding and other imperfections like this. I had turbo mode and 40 grit turned on in order to remove a lot of material, and it left that pattern. That's not good. So if you have a sander with turbo mode, turn it off. If you have a regular sander, well, really only this next part applies to you. go ahead and put your pencil grid all over it and go through it like you're going through your finish sanding, but stay at whatever grit you were starting at until everything looks nice and even. I had to go through 3 rounds of sanding with 40 grit in order to get this look right here. This is what you want to see after every single grit. This is nice and even, no bumpy surfaces, no big gouge marks or anything like that. Now with these lower grits, you're gonna get some big scratches. That's okay, that's what those are designed to do. They're designed to remove a ton of material. If you progress through the sanding grits properly, meaning one at a time, you can't go from 40 grit to 180 grit and expect those marks to come out. That's just not the way the sandpaper is designed to be used. You have to go one at a time, and those scratches will disappear if you do everything right. Now, after I finished sanded the bottom up to 180, it was time to flip this thing, and it is not getting any lighter. You heard me say at the top of this video that this slab was about 200 pounds. I think I was a little bit low with that estimate because while I'm certainly not entering any strongman competitions anytime soon, I definitely consider myself a pretty strong guy, and this thing was making me sore every single day after having to move it around. Now, something I want to point out are those black spots. Those actually aren't stained little holes that I filled in with epoxy and color. Those are actually areas of, I guess, the wood version of scar tissue from metal being put into it, and as that metal oxidized, it left those kind of black scars within the wood, and I thought that was actually kind of a pretty cool detail. So with the top now sanded up to 220 and pretty much ready for finish, it was time to move on to building the legs. Now, I have been wanting to really get into making custom table legs for a really long time because I've really wanted to challenge myself creatively and technically as a woodworker. While I do like the steel legs, I do somewhat feel as though it's a cop-out at this point for me, or maybe a crutch is a better term for that. I feel like I rely too much on that, and it's really kind of held me back as far as my creativity and my technical ability as a woodworker. So this is my attempt to get into that. But I'm going to explain to you what I'm doing here just really quick. All right, y'all, so I was having some trouble getting the right angle for you in order to see this process properly. So I have a piece here. We're going to talk it through really quick. So I'm going to try to talk slow because there's a lot of numbers involved with this, and if you're new to this, this may be kind of confusing to you. So these are 5-inch sections of 3-inch wide, 1/4-inch thick steel. I got a 3-foot section of it from Home Depot. I think it cost me something like 23 bucks. All right, so I cut them into these 5-inch sections because 5 is a nice, easy round number to work with. And I immediately drew these center lines. It's just something I do out of habit. I don't think that you absolutely have to, but I absolutely think it helps. You never know if you're gonna need it. So with this being 5 inches long, I knew that directly in the center is 2.5 inches. And with my leg material being 1.5 inches wide, I knew I needed to measure 3/4 of an inch out from the center, which if you do 1.5 or 2.5 inches minus 3/4 of an inch, you get 1 3/4 of an inch. So that's just 1 3/4 of an inch in on either side, giving me a 1.5 inch space right there in the center where it will rest on the legs. Now this center section here, I'm going to drill out some smaller holes in order to attach them to the legs and actually use some adhesive so that way they are stuck on there. You can't really remove them. And then these big sections right here on either end are going to house 2 threaded inserts per. So there's going to be 4 bolts per base plate. I have 3 on the small one and 4 on the big leg. So that should be more than enough holding power for these legs. We'll see. I hope I'm right. Okay, we're going to do this again just because it's easiest. All right, so this is the final product of what this is going to look like. So these 2 small screws are going to be some T25 deckmate screws that I'm going to screw directly into the wood. And then again, I'm going to put some adhesive somewhere right here so that way it actually bonds to the wood and it's never going to move. And then lastly, I put my 3/8 inch holes here for my threaded inserts, which Again, should have enough holding power, but that's exactly what it looks like. I'm not gonna say this was easy or quick. It definitely took me a while, and it took a lot of effort, especially since I made 7 of these. But it's definitely possible, and it's something that may be of interest to someone out there who doesn't want to have fabricated steel legs on their tables, because I'm starting to move away from that. I want to kind of challenge myself creatively to actually build custom table bases and just kind of have fun with designs that I come up with in my head. And this is exactly how I would be attaching my legs as I go forward with this. So that's how I do it. All right, with the base plates made and the glue dried on each of my panels, I got it out of the clamps and started squaring everything up, getting them down to their final dimensions of 28 inches tall, because the standard height for a desk is 30 inches. And I was trying to put this little bevel on one end, but you can see that it really just wasn't cutting evenly. And I was more than far enough in, but I tried to double down even though things really weren't going that well. And the idea here that I had was to burn this and then scrape all of the char off with a wire brush and leave this kind of raised grain pattern. I'm going to save y'all some time here. This ended up in the garbage. This was a really bad idea. This Home Depot pine is garbage. That's exactly where it belongs. So I threw all that away and then went to Houston Hardwoods and picked up all of this red oak. Now, Houston Hardwoods has a big planer and a big joiner, and they got everything down to S3S for me, meaning that it was flat on 3 sides. So an edge was jointed and both sides were planed. And right out of their tools, this thing was ready to go into glue up, and it glued up seamlessly. This is what I should have done from the get-go, and I knew that, but I was trying to save some money. I was trying to save some time. I was trying to be lazy, and it ended up biting me in the butt. This one needed a little bit more percussive maintenance, but it went down just the same as the small one. Now you see here that I have 2 different panel sizes. I have a big one and a small one. And if you've noticed the slab throughout this video, it's got a really wide section at one end and a really skinny section at one end. And I thought that having legs that kind of matched that, angle, width, whatever, would look kind of cool. So that's why I did that. Now I use Titebond 3 in order to glue all this up. It's pretty much the only wood glue that I use because it's got the most universal applications. I know there are some speculations saying that it can fail with certain wood species, but I highly doubt that oak is one of them. And it sets up in about an hour, so I'm wearing the exact same clothes that I was wearing whenever I glued it up, because it set up in about, 45 minutes, and I was able to immediately take it out of the clamps and get working with it. Now I'm going to put a 10-degree bevel on each end because I wanted this thing to sit at kind of an angle. I went back and forth on whether or not I wanted it to sit at an inward angle or an outward angle. For that kind of stuff, I usually consult my wife because with her, at least according to her, you can never go wrong with her opinions, so I usually end up trusting her judgment. Now, of course, I didn't want these to just be square blocks, so I'm using my little framing square here to find a 10 and a 7-degree angle. I wanted to see if maybe the steeper angle would look good or maybe the not so steep angle. In the end, I did end up going with the 10-degree angle because that taper just looked so much nicer in my opinion. Now I'm trying to find the very center of this because I don't know what it was about having just this kind of plain Jane tapered block of wood. I didn't really like it. I wanted something a little bit more decorative, and so this is what I came up with. I wanted to put a hole directly in the center of them. One, this is going to take off some weight because these are already really heavy. Oak is an extremely dense wood, even this basic red oak stuff. So this is what I'm doing to take off some weight, add a little bit of decoration to it, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't have some fun with it. Now with that router jig, you don't want to cut all the way through, especially with oak, because it's very splintery and it has a very high propensity to blowing out if you're using a router. So I cut about 3/4 of the way through, finish everything off with my jigsaw, and get that really satisfying pop. From there, I'm going to put a flush trim bit on my nice big router, and we're going to flush everything up, make everything nice and even, and you get a really nice elbow cam. And that looks nice and pretty. And I didn't want just regular edges, so I put a 45-degree chamfer on both sides. I thought that this just looked nice. I had no particular reason for doing this. At this point, I was just kind of running with whatever wild design popped into my head. And granted, I know this isn't wild, but it's wild to me because I was actually experiencing some level of success with building some custom table legs. Now this is how I'm attaching the base plates. I'm using some liquid nails because I used it on that mantle that I built in one of my last videos. And I asked the guy how it was still holding up, and he's like, oh yeah, it's holding up the way I told you it would. I have this stuff all over my house, and everything that I use on it is stuck. And I said, okay, cool, I wanted to know so that way I could attach stuff with it to some legs. And he said, oh yeah, it'll work. And sure enough, guys, like that stuff is not coming off. Now, yes, what you're seeing is somewhat of woodworking blasphemy. I am using spray paint and spray painting these black because oak paints really well. And because of its natural grain structure, it leaves that textured style that I've been looking for anyway. So I went ahead and spray painted it with some spray paint that I know is of really nice, high quality, and left it at that. I didn't really feel the need to overcomplicate this. That being said, I did look up this technique called cerusing, which is a technique where you force wood to have a dual tone to it that looks so freaking cool that I am really excited to try. So stay tuned for that coming up in some video. I don't even have a plan for it yet. And I hogged out some slots. I wasn't trying to be super accurate with this, just close enough to where everything would fit. I'm really just trying to hide the base plates and then let the 10-degree bevel sit nice and flush with the bottom of the slab. From there, I mean, it's business as normal whenever it comes to attaching table bases. I'm using the exact same technique I would use if I were using a steel fabricated set of legs. And I used a 3/8 inch bit in order to drill a 3/8 inch hole, and then using that as my little starter pin for my Bradley bit. Basically going through doing everything that you've seen me do. Oh, I don't even know how many videos I have, like 20 or something like that. Now because of the bevel, it was wanting to lean forward quite a bit, so I added that clamp just to hold everything in place while I put the screws in. And at this point, I was getting pretty confident because, yeah, that's a lot of bolts just holding in one leg on one side. I'm adding the exact same amount on the other side, so I gained a lot of confidence with how strong that was going to be. Now, what you saw me do there was just hope that I don't die by trying to flip this thing onto its legs in order to actually get to the finishing process. And also, if you had anything against the spray painting, look at how good those legs look and tell me that it was a bad idea. And managed not to die. You saw me breathe a nice big sigh of relief, flip it over. And I had to get a couple of small marks out. I got a new sander for Christmas or my birthday, one or the other. And sanded out all of these little marks with this new sander. It's really nice. It's not quite as aggressive as my Bosch, but that was the whole point behind it. I wanted something that was more attuned to finish sanding. And then using Rubio Monocoat as always, and you're bringing out this really nice golden color with this live oak. Normally white oak finishes with kind of a cream color, but this live oak finishes with this gorgeous gold color, and it looks so nice. And I know that those splotches right there from the scarring of the metal look kind of ugly, but you know, to me, that just looks like one of the best details of the entire project. And then I am using Rubio Monocoat to finish the sides as well, leaving those as natural as I possibly can, which is what this whole finish process is designed to do anyway. After 15 minutes, wipe everything off, and this thing was done. This was by far one of my favorite projects. I would dare to say that this takes the place of the Mappa table as my favorite project, because the story of this wood is just absolutely insane. Being from a 300-year-old tree and then getting turned into tables and usable pieces of furniture, and literally being pieces of history in people's homes. It's a crazy idea to me. I know that some people don't think quite that intimately about it, but I do. I'm a big history buff, and the history that this tree has is very significant to me. Alright guys, so that's going to do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something. And if you really enjoyed it, I really hope to have your subscription. See y'all next time.